The building of Fort Mose. The name of the town combined an existing Indian place name, Mose, with the phrase Gracia de él, which indicated that it was established by the king, and the name of the town's patron saint, Teresa de Aviles. By the time Fort Mose was established, approximately 100 formerly enslaved Africans were living in St. Augustine. Most of them had been born in West Africa before being captured and transported to America. Fort Mose was the early southern destination of the resistance movement that would later become known as the Underground Railroad. Following colonial tradition, the Spanish governor assigned a white military officer and royal official to supervise the new community. The governor also posted a student priest to instruct the residents in church doctrine and good customs. The priest lived in Mose, but there are no documents that show that the Spanish officials did. To the Spanish, the fort was a first line of defense against any future English attacks. To the newly freed inhabitants of the town, it was liberty at last. For the first time since they were enslaved by the English, African men and women could legally marry, have the right to own property, feel secure that their family members would not be sold, be paid for their labor, and make legal contracts. The recently freed militiamen and their families moved to the new frontier. There they built a fortress of freedom. It was a wall fort that, according to English sources, was constructed of stone, 4 square with a flanker at each corner, banked with earth, having a ditch without on all sides, lined with prickly royal cactus, and having a well and house within and a lookout. Spanish reports describe the town site as being surrounded by fertile lands and nearby forests, and having a river of salt running through it. The townspeople soon planted fields, cut trees they needed for building materials, and caught fish and shellfish to supplement their diet. Most residents of Mose lived in small, often oval-shaped palm thatch huts outside the fort. These huts, known as choza, were described as resembling thatched Indian huts, and may have been much like the dwellings of the Africans that they had in their homeland. Residents of Fort Mose were very aware that their being there was as important to the Spanish as it was to them. Their fortress was strategically significant, for it was the northern outpost situated at the head of Mose Creek with access to St. Augustine, about 2 miles to the south. It was also at the crossroads of 2 major overland trails, the northbound San Nicolas Trail and the westbound Appalachia Trail. They were also aware that they lived under the ever-present danger of attack. Even so, if it was the price of freedom, the residents of Mose were willing to pay for it. Members of the Mose militia would rather die than let themselves be taken back into slavery. They vowed to be the most cruel enemies of the English and to spill their last drop of blood in defense of the great crown of Spain and the Holy Faith. News of Fort Mose quickly spread to the South Carolina slaveholders and some of the Africans on the rice plantations, and to the new English colony of Georgia. The South Carolina planters had strong objections to Spain's sanctuary policy and to the very existence of Fort Mose. They took increasingly desperate measures to contain their enslaved laborers, but to no avail. Enslaved Africans responded to the news by escaping south in ever-increasing numbers. In 1738, there were 38 households of men, women, and children at Fort Mose. Of course, one of the men was Francisco Menendez. He married Ana Maria de Escobar, who, like her husband, was Mandingo. Research has not yet revealed how or when they met or when she arrived at Fort Mose, and questions remain about the exact composition of their family. Living at Fort Mose was not an easy existence. Its residents had constant concerns about food and defense, not only from the English colonists, but also from some unfriendly Indians who lived in the area. Francisco Menendez knew that even with skilled workers and fertile lands, it would take time to produce enough food to feed Fort Mose citizens, become self-sustaining, and eventually produce a surplus to supply the residents of St. Augustine. The Catholic Spanish government considered the Fort Mose residents a community of religious converts. Just as it did for other such emerging communities, it provided biscuits, corn, beef, and other provisions from government stores to help the residents. Francisco Menendez had to have been pleased that life at Fort Mose settled into a daily routine. In addition to the trades that had been taught on the plantation where they had worked, many residents remembered traditions and technologies they had brought from Africa that made them more efficient in their work. Blacksmiths, farmers, lumberjacks, sawyers, carpenters, boatmen, fishermen, homemakers, and soldiers all offered their services. Cowboys rounded up wild horses and cattle. Some residents traveled the 2 miles into St. Augustine to work and to trade. Others remained at the fort, performing tasks that were needed there. African culture influenced aspects of everyday life in Mose, ranging from crafts, dress, and religious practices to methods of farming. For most, this was the first time being enslaved that they could freely express themselves through their traditional songs and dances. Like the Spaniards, Mose residents adopted many local Indian traditions, particularly the extensive use of Indian pottery for cooking and storage. Fort Mose provided a safe haven for people who had been born in Mandingo, Carabali, Congo, and West African culture areas, and for native people who had lived along the Atlantic seacoast before the arrival of the Europeans. All of these groups had made perilous journeys from the Carolinas and Virginia, as well as from Cuba, Barbados, and elsewhere in the Caribbean. Many had reached their destination on foot or by canoe. In their leisure hours, parents surely told their children stories they had heard in Africa or on the plantation about how Brer Rabbit or another creature used its wits to outsmart a stronger, more powerful animal. The stories must have had new meaning to people who had outwitted slave catchers to reach Florida. The residents of Mose enjoyed close family ties. Africans, Indians, and Spaniards lived and worked in harmony. News of the freedom enjoyed by residents of Fort Mose continued to reach people still enslaved on Carolina plantations. It was spread by word of mouth on the slave grapevine. Coachmen and others who had a chance to travel away from their plantations and come in contact with other Africans and Indians shared whatever information they learned. Many people dreamed of escaping to Mose, and many tried.